Kia ora tātou I hui hui nei, e nā rangatira, e kuima, e koroma, he nā iwi, te awhi tamariki e rangatahi, tēnā koutou, nā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. In the language of the Indigenous people of New Zealand, I bring you greetings. I acknowledge the importance of this virtual presentation meeting gathering. I acknowledged the leaders, the chiefs of your group from all around the regions of the country. I acknowledged the female leaders as well as the male leaders. And I recognize you as the tribe of child and youth care workers as part of that tribe and sub-tribe in the world of child and youth care. And I offered you greetings, warm greetings, and I hope everything is well with you during these pandemic times. I'm going to switch across to my PowerPoint presentation, and I'll be in the background, but I'll let you see the content as we work our way through that material. So we're going to be looking at championing hope in the challenging 168-hour life spaces of residential care. And in the course of that, we're going to look at a few things like recruitment, rosters, and teamwork, because residential care and 168-hour life space care is fundamentally involves teamwork. We're going to be thinking about a range of residential centers. We might think of a residence as being a foster home with 4 or 5 young children of the same family. We might think of where they will be in a family group home, whether that's a family group home in a suburb or a part of the community, or a family group home as part of a village of family homes. It could involve village boarding hostels and educational residences where children go and attend schools. It may well involve child or youth care institutions, including children's hospital wards, as well as secure residential care and educational facilities. The thing I want to emphasize here is that we're talking about 168-hour care and education. We're not talking about institutions, but I'm going to be particularly concerned about what happens in these more complex institutions like this secure residential youth care facility in Scotland. So let's think about the 168-hour life space of residential care. Essentially, this would be the same if you were talking with live-in house parents, with child and youth care workers looking after children, foster carers, or social pedagogues. It should be remembered that social pedagogue in Northern Europe and Scandinavia, a qualified social pedagogue can take into their own home and care for up to 3 young people under supervision by the courts as their live-in carer and acting guardian. It is a full-time job recognized as somebody with specialist social pedagogue expertise. Time as children and young people in care experience it with live-in carers or social pedagogues has each day beginning with morning, evening, and night. Each week is commonly divided into weekdays, weeknights, and weekends, and then school years determine holiday periods. One of the important things to note is how key transition periods occur as morning starts, off to school during school terms, and end of school transitioning back to where they live. Weekdays transitioning into weeknights also present important opportunities like activities, homework, leisure pursuits. Weekends start with the last school day or work day of the week. The transitions from weekend back into the start of a new week, preparing for school, group activity, or events are also important transitions to note. I just want to draw your attention to the fact in a place like the United Arab Emirates, where I worked for a time, all the hostels or halls of residence had their weekends start on a Thursday because of religious activities on Fridays, and they returned to the university and their studies on the Sunday. So when we think about recruiting people into a residential position of one sort or another, one of the things we have to think about are a few mistakes that are commonly made. First one I'd like to draw attention to is the number of times I've heard people kind of comment, sometimes after work in a social occasion, if we only had more people like us around here, we could really do good work. The important question isn't how we could have more people like us around here. The real question is, what skills, experiences, and personal attributes are we missing in this staff group to provide the best residential care outcomes possible with the children and young people with whom we're there to engage and with purpose in daily life events where they live? So having everybody like us around is not a routine for success. The second one is we can improve teamwork by restricting age, gender, and life experience differences so that people are more the same and they can think together and be good. And we'll also employ some big male staff so we can get control. This is a big mistake. One of the biggest mistakes is that research evidence shows that a range of ages from 20s to 60s may be advantageous so long as gender mix and previous life experiences are also seen as potential assets in a residential care team. Well, a third mistake might be that we select based on qualifications alone. And there needs to be a capacity to use prior learning from personal, family, and youth work experiences. Qualifications are important, and I really want to say qualifications are important. Across South Africa, that's important, but it's not the beginning and end of recruitment. Demonstrated capacity to recognize prior learning, to use personal, family, and youth work experiences to engage with children and young people in care through opportunity moments are important. And we must look at how we can identify those qualities and how those people can be brought into these care positions. A fourth mistake is that appointments can be made without seeing candidates ever working an evening shift to observe how they interact with and engage youths in their life space. If such practices don't exist in most residential care centers, why isn't it a requirement to invite each prospective candidate for employment as a residential child and youth care worker to join with other staff for an evening shift that begins after school and runs until night relief? It makes it clear that we will be seeking feedback from young people and other staff members about how they may have experienced each candidate's capacity to engage and connect with people. The last thing we should be doing is just having interviews in office spaces. We need to be able to see people actually do something, even if it is over a three-phased approach: the long list, the short list, and the trial testing of how they get on the floor. Otherwise, we just accept so many things without thinking through what that might mean for the young people themselves. So if we move from recruitment and induction, how we get people into thinking like that, the next question is, when we move into shift work, and shift work adds an extra element of complexity into the 168-hour life spaces. And that complexity means that we have to think more as a relay team in the athletics event rather than in a 5,000 or 10,000 meter run where the same person is doing it all the time. So when we move into shifts, we end up having to look at those and how that influences what goes on. So I've just routinely put in one shift change at 0700 hours, 7 in the morning, I've put another one at 1,500 hours, and I've put another one at 2,300 hours. And that's because I used to work shifts like that, and I've seen those being used quite a lot. One of the challenges is that it means that we have people coming right in at the morning shift around the time that all the transitioning into the day for young people and preparing for school and all the elements that are there. So the shift doesn't really address the issues of transitioning, although with a little bit of refinement, that's been allowed to work. So we think about how shifts influence and change the complexity of 168-hour life space in a whole variety of ways. Let's think about some of those. I've been collecting rosters for the last 40 years, so I am always interested. I've worked in lots of different rosters, so I collect them. And one of the things that I've found most commonly is that people bring a roster that they've used successfully somewhere else, and they bring it and introduce it to where they're now working. That's quite a common one. Second one is that staff with seniority are usually offered their first choice of shifts. And I totally support that principle, but I also say that if the skills needed at a particular time in a particular period of working requires their skills to be used in that way, then we will make a final decision about where the shift is rather than them choosing the shift. Thirdly, at least once a month, some rosters ensure that staff teams share all the shifts across all the 168-hour roster. I call that share the pain and share the gain, that everybody has to do it. And so no complaints. Then a fourth one is a roster that may well put people 24 hours on and 24 hours off, and then alternate weekends from Friday midday through Monday midday. And the principle here is that the carer who puts a child to bed is there as they awaken. It doesn't really address the fact that every other day you meet a different person, but that's neither here nor there. That's a shift roster that I've seen, and it's been used over and over again. I've even seen a roster designed to break up staff cliques, so that the very basic principle of the roster was that nobody works long with anyone else. And tell me that's this recipe for a disaster of teamwork in a secure unit. And sure enough, that secure unit had some serious breakout incidents not long after that roster was put in place. Another one is that the younger the staff group, the more we'll find that they want Friday or Saturday nights off. Can't understand why that would be the case, but for the most part, social life tends to be built around that Friday and Saturday time. And it's not unlike what happens in the time and activity of 168 hours in any residence, so that the young people finish the school, go into the weekend and have weekend activities that are quite distinctive. So from very early age, young staff have already been socialized into thinking that Friday and Saturday nights are the nights when you have your social life. Hence, the younger the staff group, the more they want Friday and Saturday nights off. Another one is relief pools are commonly used to fill vacant shifts that other staffs don't want, and also at the weekends. So this means that if we're not careful, we have our least experienced people working at times that are high demand in relation to the young people who are there. Then we can think about shift changes that commonly occur during important transition times for children and young people. If we're not careful, the shift change takes over the children's and young people's transitions, and that's when little events can happen to get our attention. Excuse me. Finally, most rosters tend to ignore the potential benefits of what I'll call post-scheduling, where think for a moment about staff that you know or have worked with, or you yourself, who is a very good morning person. They're morning time people. They are there to make the morning wake up and get going in others. whereas others are not morning people at all. And having them do morning shift is almost torturous at times for young people because they're not welcomed into the day like the morning people do it. However, those other people may well have good evening or weekend activity expertise. So some rosters, not very many, but have actually worked out post scheduling where a daytime post gets a priority, but it's for good morning people and people who can do day tasks. And the evening activities are more activity-based, working with young people. And it gets some acknowledgement in the pay and conditions of having more unsocial hours. And a night staff also highly important, but getting some recognition of that. So post-scheduling is a different way of thinking about rosters. Well, let's think about how that roster discussion might apply in this example of a special residential care center in Ireland. And if you look at the darkened sections in green, and then look at the darkened sections in yellow or orange, you'll see that you have built into this roster an A team and a B team. The A team and the B team have different weekend time, and some have their weekend on Thursday and Friday, some have their weekend on Saturday and Sunday. And the people in the gray on the third line are the fill-in or relief people who are there to cover whenever there isn't cover from the A and the B team. One has to look closely, but then you see where the single columns in green are, and below those, the single columns in orange and going down in gray. Those are the rostered Wednesday staff meeting that takes place from 2:30 to 3:30 every Wednesday. So everybody is rostered for the important staff meeting. But on the weekends, if you look closely, the weekends have minimal cover and heavily reliant on relief staff. So I come back to the question of how do we locate each young person at the center of our rostering of staff and residential care practices? The notion that a roster should have fairness in it and everybody should have the same highs and lows and roster over the course of a week, of course of a month, or a course of a semester. There's just so little evidence to support that that's a good way to do it. The literature on stress and burnout, the literature on how do you keep a team working quite closely around important matters and nurturing similar kind of behaviors on the part of young people, that requires a careful consideration of how you have people together and working together. I'm going to look at that in a moment. Does each young person know what staff members will be on duty and who manages us and COVID this week? How often do we ask that question? Do you really think young people in care don't know what's going on amongst staff working different shifts? Or that staff on different shifts have different approaches to the same issues? Front and foremost to me is what is the highlight of each young person's week whilst living in the 168-hour life space of residential care. It keeps us up to date, and it keeps us thinking of highlights rather than problems. So I want to spend the rest of our time thinking about 4 different types of team work that I have found over the course of my 40 years of working around and having an interest in this field. And I want to start with team type 1. And team type 1 is perhaps best thought of as a team coming together for the first time and you've not met each other, or you've only met a few, or essentially that's coming together for the first time, or move to a new group, move to a new place to work, open a place. And what happens is that if we're not careful, people are going to be more connected to what's going on in their personal lives than they are what's going on in their work lives. And so work and private issues very clearly begin to influence and cloud teamwork, and not connected to what the primary task of relational care is with these young people. And until that happens, they're going to be pretty maladaptive in the way they operate. Second type of team is a team that's got more connections to each other, but they tend to think about things in a more superficial way, and about what relational care means with young people, particular young people. And sometimes you'll hear it that they remember this reminds us so-and-so that they worked with, and they did this with that person, or ways of working which are not very thought out or carefully considered, that it's sort of, if he does this A, we do this B, that kind of reactive relational connections and less purposeful engagement. That kind of team, in some instances, might be okay, but essentially, it's not going to be able to engage very carefully with young people. Third type of team is a little more common, fragmentation in team members. So as we saw in that staffing roster that we looked at a few minutes ago, the roster actually built and fragmented the team into an A and a B, with also having the fragments of a relief cover. So the fragmentation was actually built into the very roster that they were working with. And so it's not uncommon in those situations to find that different factions or Team A members and Team B members have different points of view about what's going on and what we need to be doing with particular young people. And we get we and they commentaries that are commonly highlighted. And then Team 4 is, I think, more actively engaged, where team members acknowledge each other, they recognize and work with each other as colleagues, and sharing opportunity moments with each other, as well as relational care with the young people in their living and learning environment. And these are the kind of teams that have gone through various processes, but they get to where they want to stay together, work together, and their work continues to have a really positive effect. And I can think of teams that I've visited or places that I've visited there in your own homeland where I would say that's what I saw happening. So let me think about, if we have those teams, what can we do about them? What do we need to do to try to make it work better? If we have type 1 teams where people are dissociated and disconnected amongst the team members, it requires a whole lot of more directive supervision. Somebody who's actually going to spend the time giving directive supervision around what the primary tasks of relational involvement are in the care and education plans required with every youth in this residence. Not standing back, stay focused on the care and education plans with each resident and youth in the residence, and how we're going to deal with each one of those as a positive influence in their day. And private issues, stay at home. They can be acknowledged in supervision, but they don't flood into and override into what's going on in the work time of a residential team. The second type of team, superficial teams, are ones where I think we might find those working in residential care, they also need directive supervision, but that supervision needs to focus on actually noticing opportunity moments, noticing them and seeing them and identifying these in the daily life events of care and education planning. And by noticing them, we can actually begin to notice and respond and nurture the kind of developmental growth that we're trying to help this young person to develop, and how to involve family members when and wherever possible to keep them connected to each other. Third type of team is those fragmented teams, those factions or allies fighting with each other sometimes, or arguing with each other. Sometimes that can be a positive influence, being a reminder to think about things that we haven't considered as a team, but they may be structurally reinforced by the way the roster, again, as I said, assigns co-workers. So if you look closely at your roster, ask the question, how does this roster that we've been using allow us to have supervision or teamwork that is together without being fragmented into team A and team B? And my argument is that you need directive supervision that focuses on what the care and education plans actually are, with supervision on the go. I want to emphasize this notion of supervision on the go, so that a supervisor is not just there at certain times, but they're actually working alongside all staff in the course of a weekly shift. So that instead of working the same shifts all the time, there may be some flexibility, including in terms of the day, that a supervisor can actually have time working alongside others so that they are not caught out by having to have connections through others or team meetings or when things happen. So that's where we are. That's what I think we can get to. And with that, I hope that we have offered you some things to think about, because we think this offers a way of championing hope and engaging in making things work better. Thank you very much.